Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Please drop a like or comment if you want to help the channel. Now let's get into the true scary stories. The Well of Whispering. There had always been something unsettling about the old well in my grandmother's garden. It stood alone, weathered by time, overgrown with ivy and moss. It was an odd fixture, like a relic of a forgotten time, far older than the house itself. As a child, I would often call down into its depths, listening to the strange way my voice would echo back. But it never sounded quite right. There was always an odd distortion, a delay that was just a bit too long, like something down there was thinking about what to say before repeating my words. It was a warm autumn afternoon when I first noticed something truly off. I had returned to my grandmother's house after years away. She had passed, and now the house was mine. I stood in the overgrown garden, gazing at the well. The cover had rotted through, leaving the dark, gaping hole exposed. I couldn't resist the familiar pull, a strange mix of nostalgia and dread, and called into the void. "Hello?" My voice bounced back after a long, eerie pause. But it wasn't my voice. Not entirely. There was a whispering edge to it, something hungry beneath the echo. I frowned and tried again. "Is someone there?" The reply was immediate this time, low and chilling. "Jump." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Surely, I had misheard. The wind had picked up, stirring the leaves around my feet, but the air around the well felt thick, almost suffocating. My heart raced, and despite the growing sense of unease, I took a hesitant step closer. A cold breeze seemed to waft up from the well, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else. Something foul. "Hello?" I called again, my voice shaky. "Jump," the echo whispered back, more insistent this time. I stumbled backward, my skin prickling. The words couldn't have come from the well. It wasn't possible. I told myself it was just my imagination, the wind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew. The well had answered. And it wanted me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the well, heard the whisper urging me to jump, felt its dark presence creeping into my thoughts. The house was silent, too silent, and the more I tried to ignore it, the more the voice seemed to grow in strength, pressing against the edges of my mind. I could hear it, even without being near the garden. In the morning, I decided to cover the well, to seal whatever it was down there. But as I approached, the air around the garden felt heavier, darker. The echo was still with me, whispering, calling. "Jump." The days after that were a blur of restless sleep and gnawing unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that something from the well was watching me, waiting for a moment of weakness. Every time I passed the garden, I felt its pull, like an invisible thread tying me to that cursed hole in the earth. I had tried covering it with heavy planks and even piled stones around the rim, but it didn't help. The voice was always there, just beneath the surface of my thoughts, whispering, coaxing. "Jump." I started avoiding the garden altogether, but that only made the sensation worse. It didn't stay confined to the well anymore. The whispers followed me into the house, creeping into the corners of my room at night. I thought I was losing my mind when I began hearing soft footsteps outside my bedroom door, a low scraping sound that grew louder as the nights wore on. Every time I gathered the courage to check, the hallway was empty, but I could still feel something lingering in the dark. One night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I heard the whisper again, louder this time. It wasn't coming from the well. It was in my room. My pulse quickened as I sat up, straining to listen. The voice drifted from the far corner, where shadows danced along the walls, thick and unnatural. "Jump," it hissed. This time, there was no mistaking it. Something was in the room with me. I leapt from the bed, grabbing the old oil lamp from the bedside table and lighting it with trembling hands. The flame flickered weakly, casting long, jittery shadows across the walls. And there, in the farthest corner, was a figure. It stood just beyond the reach of the light, its form barely visible, but I could make out its shape, tall, gaunt, and twisted. It seemed to be made of the same darkness that filled the well, its face hidden beneath a veil of blackness. But I could feel its gaze, cold and unrelenting. Who are you?" I managed to choke out. The figure didn't move, but the whisper filled the room again, reverberating off the walls, making my skin crawl. Jump? I backed toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure tilted its head slightly, almost curiously, as if it was studying me. My legs felt like they might give out, but I forced myself to move. I bolted down the hallway, not stopping until I was outside, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. For a moment, I thought I was safe. But as I glanced back at the house, I saw it. The figure was standing at the window of my bedroom, watching. Waiting. I couldn't stay here any longer. I needed to know what was happening. Why had the well started speaking? What was this thing that now haunted my every step? Desperation clawed at me as I realized there was only one person left who might know the answer, old Mrs. Fisher, the village historian, and the keeper of all the town's dark secrets. The next morning, I made my way to her small cottage at the edge of the village, my mind racing. When she opened the door, her eyes widened as if she had been expecting me. Before I could even speak, she nodded and said, "It started again, hasn't it? The well." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Mrs. Fisher's cottage smelled of damp wood and dust, the air thick with the weight of untold stories. She motioned for me to sit, her old hands trembling as she lit a fire. "You've been hearing it, haven't you? The well," she whispered, settling into her chair. Her eyes bore into mine, filled with a knowledge too terrible to speak aloud. I nodded, my throat dry. It told me to jump. It said my name. My voice cracked as I recalled the whispers, the shadowed figure. And I saw something. Something, in my house. Mrs. Fisher's gaze darkened, her hands folding tightly in her lap. I hoped it was gone for good. I hoped we'd seen the last of it, she sighed deeply, as if the weight of the past had settled back onto her frail shoulders. You're not the first. The well, it's been part of this village for longer than anyone can remember. Longer than the house, the gardens, longer than people. Her words made my stomach twist. What do you mean? What's in the well? She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a hushed tone. No one knows for sure. But there are stories. Dark stories. About the land beneath this village, about what lies buried deep in the earth. The well was never meant to be touched, never meant to be opened. But... She paused, eyes flickering toward the window as though she feared the shadows might hear her. There are those who tried to control it. To summon the things that dwell below. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. Summon? You mean, someone brought that thing here? Mrs. Fisher nodded grimly. A long time ago, before the village was even built. There were rituals, sacrifices. People drawn to the power beneath the earth, power they couldn't understand. They thought they could use it. But the well, it doesn't serve us. It takes. I swallowed hard, dread knotting in my chest. And now it's after me? The well remembers, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It calls to those it chooses. It waits for the right moment, and then, it claims them. For a moment, the room felt suffocating, the crackling of the fire suddenly too loud, too alive. But why me? I asked, my voice shaking. Why now? Mrs. Fisher shook her head, her expression filled with pity. It doesn't need a reason. It hungers, and once it's chosen you, there's no turning back. It will keep calling you, and the more you resist, the stronger its pull will become. I stood up abruptly, panic rising. There has to be a way to stop it. To seal it. I can't just let it. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong for her age. There is no sealing it, child. The only way out is to do what it asks. My breath caught in my throat. You're telling me I have to jump? Her eyes gleamed with something dark, something resigned. It's not about the fall. It's about what waits for you in the dark. The well is a door, a gateway. Once you pass through, it takes what it needs. And once it does, perhaps it will leave you be. I backed away, shaking my head. That can't be the only way. There has to be something else. But even as I spoke, I could feel the cold breath of the well on the back of my neck, the whisper threading its way through my thoughts. Mrs. Fisher stood slowly, crossing the room to retrieve an old, worn book. This was written by the last one who survived the well. Barely. He came back, but he was never the same. She handed me the book, her hands trembling. "Read it, if you want to understand. But know this, once the well calls, it never stops." I took the book, my fingers numb with fear. The weight of it pressed into my hands, the pages yellowed and brittle. I didn't want to open it, didn't want to know the horrors it held. But I had no choice. As I left her cottage and stepped back into the cold, gray morning, the whispers were louder than ever, wrapping around me like a living thing. The well was waiting. The walk back to the house was unbearable. Every step felt heavier, each footfall accompanied by the soft, constant whisper that echoed in the back of my mind. The old book Mrs. Fisher had given me felt like it was burning a hole in my bag, its weight far more than it should have been. The voice was relentless now, louder than before, no longer hiding in the shadows. "Jump," it hissed, over and over. I stood at the edge of the garden, staring at the well. The stones I had piled around it had been disturbed, scattered across the overgrown grass. The planks I had used to cover the opening were gone, as if they had never been there. The mouth of the well yawned before me, a dark, endless void. I wanted to run, to leave this cursed place and never look back. But my legs refused to move. The pull of the well was irresistible now, a silent command that tugged at something deep within me. I took a shaky breath and pulled out the book, flipping through its yellowed pages. The handwriting was frantic, scrawled in uneven lines, but I could make out the author's desperate words. "The well is not a well. It is a door. A door to something old, something that feeds on our fear, on our life." I thought I could escape, but I was wrong. It took part of me. It will take all of you. My hands trembled as I read the last few entries. The man had gone down into the well. He had seen what lay beneath. But he had come back. Different. The words grew more incoherent, more maddening as they went on, until the writing devolved into a series of jagged lines, scratches that tore through the paper. The final page had only one word, written over and over: "Jump." I slammed the book shut, my pulse pounding in my ears. The well was no longer just a whisper. It was alive. And it wanted me. The air around me grew colder, thick with the stench of damp earth and decay. The shadows seemed to crawl out from the well, creeping across the grass, reaching for me. I stumbled back, panic rising in my chest, but the whisper only grew louder, more insistent. "Jump." I don't know what possessed me to move closer, but I found myself standing at the very edge of the well, peering down into the blackness. The dark void stretched down further than I could see, a bottomless pit that seemed to swallow the light. My heart raced, and I knew, deep down, that there was no escaping this. The well had claimed me the moment I had first heard its voice. And then I saw it. Far below, something moved. At first, it was just a shimmer in the darkness, a ripple in the air. But as I stared, it became clearer. A face. Pale, twisted, and monstrous. It looked up at me with hollow, empty eyes, its mouth curling into a grotesque smile. It was waiting. I stumbled back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure in the well didn't disappear. It rose, slowly, impossibly, from the depths, pulling itself up the stone walls with long, skeletal hands. The thing was climbing toward me, inch by inch. Terror gripped me as the air seemed to thicken around me, the shadows pressing closer. The voice in my head screamed now, louder than my own thoughts. "Jump." I had no choice. I had to end this. I stepped to the edge of the well, my heart hammering in my chest. My legs shook, but I couldn't resist the pull any longer. With one last look at the twisted figure clawing its way toward me, I took a deep breath. And I jumped. The air rushed past me, cold and suffocating. I fell into the dark, the world spinning as the well swallowed me whole. And then, in the blackness, I heard it. The voice, clear, close, almost tender. "Welcome home. Hey. Subscribe for more true scary stories." Story 2. The Mirror's Edge. I never believed in haunted objects. To me, mirrors were just glass, cold, polished surfaces that reflected what was in front of them. They didn't hold secrets or trap spirits. That was, until I inherited the mirror. It arrived in a cracked wooden crate at my doorstep, a gift from my late aunt's estate. I didn't know her well, but my mother used to tell stories about her, strange ones. Aunt Edith had been obsessed with antiques, particularly ones with unsettling histories. I knew this mirror had to be one of those pieces. It was large, standing 7 feet tall, framed in ornate gold, but the glass itself was smoky, as if memories from the past were etched into it. My first instinct was to leave it in the crate and send it to the attic, but something about it beckoned me. It didn't take long for me to notice something was off. At first, I thought it was my imagination. I would glance at the mirror and see myself looking back, but with a subtle delay. It was always just a split second behind me. When I raised my hand to brush my hair, the reflection followed, but not quite immediately. A beat slower. It seemed silly to even mention it, but it gave me chills. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was the odd shape of the glass, the way the light hit it from the corner of the room. But the feeling gnawed at me. Days passed, and the delay grew more pronounced. I'd turned to leave the room, only to glance back and see my reflection standing still for a moment longer before mimicking my movement. Maybe I'm overworked, I muttered, convincing myself it was fatigue playing tricks on my mind. I had always been a skeptic, but this was testing me. Then the whispers started. Faint at first, like the rustle of wind through a cracked window, but there was no wind. Just me. And the mirror. It was late one night when I finally admitted that something was seriously wrong. I had been lying in bed, tossing and turning, unable to shake the unease. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement, but I wasn't moving. I slowly sat up, my gaze fixed on the mirror, which was just visible through the half-open door. My reflection was already standing, watching me. I froze, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out every rational thought. My reflection hadn't waited for me to move. I stood and walked toward the door, hoping it was a trick of the light, but the figure in the mirror remained still, its face fixed in an expression I didn't recognize, an almost smug grin. That's when it happened. I watched, horrified, as my reflection calmly turned, opened the door, and walked out of the room. I hadn't moved. I stood frozen, staring at the open doorway where my reflection had vanished moments earlier. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. My reflection. Leaving? It was impossible. I took a hesitant step toward the door, peering into the dark hallway, half expecting to see some bizarre trick of the shadows, but it was empty. Silent. I felt the weight of the mirror behind me, as if it were watching, waiting. I didn't dare turn around. Instead, I bolted for the hallway light, my fingers fumbling over the switch. When the light flickered on, the house seemed too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. I could feel my pulse throbbing in my neck, a constant reminder that I was still here, still real. But the question gnawed at me, was I? Was the me I saw in the mirror still in the room, lurking in the shadows? Summoning every bit of courage I had left, I crept back to the door of my bedroom and slowly peeked inside. My heart dropped. The mirror stood still in the corner, unchanged, but there was no reflection. I swallowed hard, stepping further in, testing it. The cold, smoky surface reflected the room perfectly, everything except for me. My breath caught in my throat. I reached out instinctively, brushing my fingertips against the surface, half expecting them to sink into some otherworldly void, but they met cold glass. Solid. Real? But that didn't explain where my reflection had gone. I was spiraling, I knew that. I told myself to get out of the room, to run as far from that cursed mirror as I could, but something held me in place. It was the faint sound of footsteps. Coming from upstairs? I had no idea how I found the nerve to move, but my feet carried me forward, up the staircase. The creaking of the old wood echoed unnervingly in the stillness. The attic door was slightly ajar, as if someone, had been there recently. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open, and there, amidst the dust and forgotten boxes, stood the mirror. Another mirror. Identical to the one downstairs, but this one. It felt wrong. Its glass wasn't just smoky, it was dark, rippling with a strange, oily sheen. As I stepped closer, I caught sight of something moving within it, but this time, it wasn't my reflection. I barely had time to react before a shape pressed against the inside of the glass, its hand smearing across the surface as if trying to escape. It was me, or at least, it looked like me. But there was something off. Its eyes were wider, too wide, and filled with a hollow, malicious intent. It grinned at me with the same smug expression I had seen earlier. "No," I whispered, stepping back. But my twin didn't stop. It raised a hand, and I felt a cold, invisible grip tighten around my throat. The air around me grew heavy, stifling, and I gasped, struggling to breathe as the thing in the mirror began to step closer, pushing through the glass, bending reality. Its voice echoed in my head, low and twisted, like something from the depths of a nightmare. "Come. Join me." I tried to scream, but no sound came. My vision blurred, the world spinning as I teetered on the edge of losing myself. I stumbled backward, my hands clawing at my throat as I tried to breathe, but the grip around my neck tightened. The figure in the mirror, the twisted version of me, continued to press forward, sliding through the glass as if it were liquid. My mind screamed in panic, but my body wouldn't move. I could feel its icy presence approaching, and the air grew thick with dread. Just when I thought I'd black out from the pressure on my throat, the grip suddenly released. I collapsed to the floor, gasping, coughing, my chest heaving as I dragged air back into my lungs. The attic was spinning, my vision hazy, but I could still see the figure standing over me. It looked like me, down to every detail, except the eyes. They were wrong, too dark, too hollow, filled with something ancient and hungry. "You've seen me now," it said, its voice low and venomous, like the scrape of metal on stone. "You can't hide from what you are." "What? What do you want?" I croaked, still struggling to regain control of my body. My limbs felt heavy, as if they didn't quite belong to me anymore. The thing grinned, and I shuddered. "I want what was always mine. Your life. Your world. You've been staring into the mirror all this time, thinking it was harmless. But it was never just glass. It circled me, watching with eyes that gleamed in the dim light of the attic. You're the reflection. You're the one on the wrong side." I forced myself to stand, even though my legs were shaking. That's not true. I'm real. You're just some kind of trick. A demon." My voice wavered, but I held my ground. The figure tilted its head, the smile never leaving its face. "Is that what you think? You believe you're the original, the one who belongs here?" It stepped closer, its breath cold against my skin. "Then why do you feel so out of place? Haven't you noticed the cracks in your world? The distortions in your mind?" The words hit me like a blow to the chest. My mind raced, searching for something to hold on to, some proof that I was real. Memories flashed through my mind, growing up, my friends, my life. But they felt distant, as if they were fading. Panic surged through me again. "You're lying," I spat, more to convince myself than anything else. The thing that looked like me leaned in close, its voice barely above a whisper. "Am I? Then why do I know everything about you? Why can I feel your thoughts slipping away, even now?" I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. This couldn't be happening. I turned, desperate to escape, but my feet wouldn't move. The mirror loomed in front of me, and for a moment, I saw myself in the reflection, or at least the version of me I wanted to believe was real. But the glass rippled, distorting the image. "You can't escape," the figure said softly. "Not anymore." Before I could react, the surface of the mirror shimmered, and a hand shot out, grabbing my arm. I screamed, trying to pull away, but it was too strong. The cold, slick surface of the glass began to pull me in, dragging me toward the darkness inside. I kicked and thrashed, but my strength was no match for the force dragging me under. As I felt the icy pull of the mirror swallow me, the last thing I saw was the figure standing over me, smiling as it turned away and walked down the stairs. My stairs. It was taking my life. And I was falling into the glass, into the dark void behind it. The sensation of falling through the glass was nothing like I had imagined. It wasn't a simple transition from one side to the other, it felt like being pulled apart, like every piece of me was unraveling into something smaller, more fragmented. My screams echoed in the cold, infinite darkness as I tumbled into a world I didn't recognize, a world where the laws of reality no longer applied. When I finally hit the ground, I found myself in a vast, dimly lit space. The floor beneath me was smooth, cold, like glass, No walls, no ceilings, just an endless stretch of reflective surface. Everywhere I turned, I saw twisted versions of myself staring back, their eyes hollow and mocking. Shadows lurked at the edges, shifting in and out of focus. This place was a nightmare, a reflection of everything I feared. I scrambled to my feet, my pulse racing as I tried to orient myself. This isn't real, I muttered, trying to keep my mind from collapsing under the weight of the terror. This can't be real. But it felt real, too real. Every step I took echoed into the emptiness, and every breath felt like it was being pulled from me by invisible hands. "You're here now," a voice whispered, low and menacing. I spun around, only to come face to face with the version of me that had escaped the mirror. Its grin was wider than before, more grotesque, as if it were feeding on my fear. "This is where you belong." "No," I shouted, backing away. "I'm not staying here. This isn't my world." The figure stepped closer, its eyes narrowing with a malicious gleam. "You still think you're the real one? The world you left behind is already forgetting you. In time, you'll forget yourself too." I shook my head, refusing to believe it. My memories were still intact, my life was still real. Wasn't it? But the longer I stood there, the more the mirror world began to pull at me, eroding my sense of self, whispering doubts into my mind. I had to get out. I had to find a way back before I lost everything. In the distance, I spotted something, another mirror. This one was smaller, like a doorway, shimmering with a faint light. It was my only chance. I ran, my feet slipping on the slick surface, the echoes of my footsteps chasing me like taunts. Behind me, I could hear the twisted version of myself laughing, its voice a distorted mockery of my own. "You won't make it," it called out. "You'll never escape." But I didn't stop. I couldn't. With every ounce of strength I had left, I threw myself toward the mirror, reaching out as the surface rippled in front of me. My fingers touched the cold glass, and for a moment, I felt the pull of the real world on the other side. I could hear faint sounds, distant but familiar. My world. My life. Just as I began to push through, I felt something grab my ankle. I screamed, looking down to see a hand, pale and twisted, dragging me back into the darkness. The reflection was pulling me in, its grin stretching wider as it clawed at me, determined to keep me trapped. "No." I kicked and fought, my hand slipping from the edge of the mirror. The world on the other side was so close, but I was losing strength. The grip on my ankle tightened, and the cold, empty darkness began to swallow me whole. My vision blurred, the light from the real world fading. Then, in one final burst of desperation, I reached out and yanked the mirror toward me. It shattered in my hand with a deafening crack, shards of glass exploding into the air like jagged stars. The grip on my ankle loosened, and the reflection scream filled the void as it was dragged back into the shadows. I fell forward, tumbling out of the broken mirror and crashing onto the floor of my bedroom. My chest heaved, every breath feeling like a victory as I lay there, staring at the pieces of shattered glass scattered around me. The mirror was gone. The reflection. Gone. But as I caught my breath and tried to stand, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye made me freeze. I turned slowly, dreading what I might see. In the fractured shards on the floor, my reflection stared back at me, its hollow, twisted grin slowly widening. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.